What creates a monster? Is it a flaw in the wiring of the brain, a product of a cruel and unforgiving environment, or something else entirely? A conscious choice to embrace the darkness that resides within us all. For centuries, we have grappled with this question, studying the shadows of humanity to understand the nature of evil. But the monsters of today are different. They wear new masks, wield new weapons, and haunt new hunting grounds. This is not a journey into the distant past, into the well-trodden stories of Bundy or Gacy. This is an exploration of the here and now. We are unmasking the most barbaric killers of the modern era, those who have emerged since the dawn of the 21st century. Their methods are often more savage, their motivations more opaque, and their brutality amplified by the very tools of progress we hold in our hands. The digital age promised connection, a global village where information flowed freely. But for a new breed of predator, it created a hunting ground without borders, a place of anonymity where dark fantasies could be nurtured and victims could be selected with a click. The same technology that connects us can also be used to isolate, to terrorize, and to destroy. In this investigation, we will dissect the cases that have defined a new chapter in criminal history. We will examine the psychological profiles of killers who broadcast their madness online, who used gig economy jobs as a cover for their rage, and who turned the promise of a smart home into a sophisticated trap. These are stories that reflect the anxieties and paradoxes of our time. We will journey alongside the investigators who race against time, armed with new forensic technologies that were science fiction just a generation ago. From digital footprints and DNA phenotyping to the painstaking work of tracking cryptocurrency, the fight against modern evil requires a new kind of detective. Their struggle is a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of unspeakable acts. We are joined by Dr. Alistair Finch, a leading criminal psychologist who has spent his career mapping the minds of violent offenders. His insights will guide us through the complex interplay of personality disorders, environmental triggers, and the unique pressures of modern life that can forge a killer. The modern killer is often a paradox. They can be hyper-connected online, yet profoundly isolated in reality. This digital disinhibition allows them to escalate fantasies into actions with terrifying speed. We're seeing a breakdown of traditional motives. It's less about gain and more about a nihilistic expression of power and rage. Our first case takes us to the sprawling suburbs of North Texas, a landscape of manicured lawns and digital connectivity. It was here in 2023 that a predator emerged who was so adept at using the tools of modern life that his victims never saw him coming. They called him the Ghost of the Grid, and his method was as simple as it was terrifying. He hunted through social media. His name was Kalen Vance, a 28-year-old IT technician who lived a life of quiet anonymity. To his neighbors, he was the unremarkable man in the gray sedan. Online, however, he was a meticulous predator, a digital phantom who spent hundreds of hours a week not on the dark web, but on the public, sunlit platforms we all use every day: Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Vance's methodology was chillingly patient. He didn't hack accounts or use sophisticated malware. He simply watched. He scrolled through public profiles, paying close attention to geotags, the digital breadcrumbs people leave, often unconsciously, marking their favorite coffee shops, parks, and jogging trails. He would select the target, almost always a young woman living alone, and begin a period of intense digital surveillance. He learned their schedules, their friends, their habits, all from the information they willingly shared with the world. He knew when they went to yoga, what time they walked their dog, and the layout of their apartment from their own posts. For a personality like Vance's, likely narcissistic with strong schizoid traits, this was the ultimate power trip. He could achieve a sense of omniscience, of control over his target's life, without any of the risks of social interaction, which he likely feared or disdained. The victim becomes an object, a character in his private drama, long before he ever makes physical contact.
The first victim was Amelia Chen, a 24-year-old graphic designer. She was an avid Instagram user, documenting her life with vibrant photos of her apartment, her cat, and her frequent visits to a local park. To her followers, it was a diary of a happy, creative life. To Kaylin Vance, it was a blueprint for murder. On the evening of October 12, 2023, Vance, armed with the knowledge that Amelia's building had a faulty side entrance, a detail she'd complained about in a fleeting Instagram story, slipped inside. He knew she would be home, as she had just posted a picture of her cat with the caption, "Cozy Night In." The brutality of what happened next sent a shockwave through the community. The crime scene was one of controlled chaos. There was no forced entry, nothing was stolen. The attack was swift, savage, and deeply personal. Detective Miles Corrigan of the Dallas Police Department was one of the first on the scene. He remembers the unsettling neatness of the apartment, violently disrupted in only one small area.
It was clean, too clean. You walk in and everything's in its place, except for the event. It tells you the offender wasn't there to rob. He was there for her. It felt like an execution, like he'd been in the space before, even if only in his mind. The lack of a clear entry point was the first major puzzle.
The investigation initially stalled. There was no DNA left at the scene that didn't belong to the victim, no fingerprints, no witnesses. Vance was a ghost. He had worn gloves, shoe covers, and a mask. He had planned his intrusion and exit with the precision of a software engineer debugging code. 2 months later, it happened again. This time, the victim was a 27-year-old nurse named Priya Sharma. Like Amelia, Priya was active on social media, sharing her grueling work schedule and her cherished moments of peace at a nearby nature preserve. Vance had followed her digital trail for weeks, learning the exact time she would return from her night shift. The second crime scene was a near-perfect echo of the first. No forced entry, extreme violence directed at the victim, and an almost complete lack of forensic evidence. The media dubbed the killer the ghost of the grid, and a palpable fear began to grip the city. Women started locking down their social media profiles, but for many, the information was already out there. Detective Corrigan and his team were facing a new kind of serial killer. The traditional methods of canvassing neighborhoods and looking for known offenders were proving useless. The connection between the victims wasn't geographic or social, it was digital. They were connected by their online visibility. The breakthrough came from a specialized cybercrimes unit brought in to analyze the victims' digital lives. They weren't just looking at their posts, they were looking at who was looking at their posts. It was a monumental task, like searching for one specific grain of sand on a vast beach. An analyst named Jenna Diaz spent weeks building a program to cross-reference public profile viewers, likes, and comments across multiple platforms for both victims. She was looking for an overlap, a digital phantom who had shown interest in both Amelia Chen and Priya Sharma but had never interacted with them directly. A lurker in internet parlance. After sifting through tens of thousands of data points, she found one. A single, anonymous-looking profile with a generic username, user749b. This profile had viewed Amelia's public stories 117 times in the month before her murder. It had viewed Priya's profile over 200 times. It never liked, never commented, never followed. It just watched. Detective Corrigan, this was our first real lead. User749b was a ghost account. No personal information, no photos, just a blank slate. But it was the one common denominator. The problem was, how do you trace a ghost? The account was created using an anonymized IP address, routed through a dozen servers. It was a digital dead end. But Vance had made one tiny, almost imperceptible mistake. Months before the killings began, in the early stages of his obsessive planning, he had used his home Wi-Fi for a single 2-second login to the user 749B account before remembering to activate his VPN. It was a momentary lapse in his otherwise perfect digital hygiene. The cybercrimes unit, working with the platform's engineers, dug deep into the server logs. They found that one 2-second blip, a single packet of data that carried an IP address registered to a nondescript apartment complex in Plano, a suburb north of Dallas. It was the needle in the digital haystack. When police arrived at Kalen Vance's apartment, they found a man who was calm, almost serene. He didn't resist. His apartment was Spartan, meticulously clean, except for one room, his office. Inside, 3 monitors glowed, displaying a complex web of social media profiles, maps, and schedules. On one screen was the profile of his next intended victim. In his encrypted files, detectives found a horrifying library of digital surveillance. He had cataloged hundreds of potential targets, creating detailed files on each one. He had screenshots of their homes, their cars, their friends. It was a testament to a mind that had completely blurred the line between the digital and physical worlds. Dr. Finch represents a terrifying evolution of the organized killer. His cooling-off period wasn't spent dormant. It was spent in the digital realm, meticulously planning and rehearsing. This constant immersion in his violent fantasies, fueled by a steady stream of information from his victims, created a feedback loop that strengthened his resolve and dehumanized the people he was targeting. They were no longer human. They were data points in his project. The case of the ghost of the grid sent a chill through our hyper-connected world. It served as a brutal reminder that the information we share, the digital lives we curate, can be weaponized. Kalen Vance was not a monster who lurked in the dark alleys of our cities, but one who hid in plain sight in the bright, glaring light of our screens. As Vance's case moved through the courts, another equally disturbing story was unfolding across the Atlantic, in the rain-swept streets of Manchester, England. This case would reveal a different kind of modern monster, one forged not in digital obsession, but in profound real-world isolation and the corrosive influence of online extremism. This was the case of the Crimson Courier. Arthur Finchley was 34 years old, a man adrift in the modern gig economy. He worked as a food delivery courier, a solitary job that saw him spend 10 to 12 hours a day on his moped, a silent observer of the city's life, but never a participant. His only real interactions were brief, transactional handoffs at doorways. Finchley lived alone in a small, damp flat in a forgotten corner of the city. His life was a monotonous loop of work, sleep, and the endless scroll of his computer screen. It was in the anonymous forums and radical chat rooms of the internet that he found a sense of belonging and, more dangerously, a sense of purpose. He was drawn into a nihilistic online subculture, a world of incels or involuntary celibates. It was a community built on a shared sense of grievance, resentment towards women, and a deep-seated feeling of being cheated by society. Here, his personal failures were reframed as a systemic injustice, and his loneliness curdled into a violent, misogynistic rage. For individuals like Arthur Finchley, these online echo chambers are incredibly seductive. They provide a prepackaged ideology that explains all of their personal shortcomings. It's never their fault. It's the fault of women, of society, of the system. This externalization of blame is a key psychological step towards justifying violence. It transforms them from a loser into a soldier in a perceived war. Finchley's descent was gradual but steady. He began to see his delivery job not just as a means of survival, but as a form of reconnaissance. Every door he knocked on, every person who answered, became a data point in his warped worldview. He saw happy couples, successful women, people living the lives he felt he was denied, and with each delivery, his resentment grew. His targets were not random. They were women who, in his mind, represented everything he hated. They were young, attractive, and seemingly happy. He chose them from his delivery routes, marking their addresses on a digital map, adding his own hateful annotations. The first attack occurred on a cold Tuesday night in February 2024. The victim was a 29-year-old solicitor named Chloe Davis. Finchley had delivered food to her apartment building several times. He knew she lived alone and that the building's main door was often slow to close. He waited in the shadows, his courier bag slung over his shoulder, making him look like just another worker in the urban landscape. When a resident entered, he slipped in behind them. He made his way to Chloe's flat and knocked. When she opened the door, expecting a delivery, he forced his way inside. The attack was an explosion of pent-up rage. Unlike the cold, calculated precision of Kalen Vance, Finchley's violence was frenzied and chaotic. He used a knife, a weapon of brutal intimacy. The crime scene, described by one officer as an abattoir, was a testament to the depth of his fury. Detective Chief Inspector Eleanor Vance of the Greater Manchester Police led the investigation. The initial lack of motive was baffling. Chloe Davis had no known enemies, no troubled relationships. The only clue was the sheer, unadulterated rage of the attack. In a typical homicide, you look for the 3 M's: money, madness, or matrimony. This had none of that. It felt like a complete stranger, but the level of violence was deeply personal. It's a terrifying combination, because it means the motive isn't about the victim as an individual, but what the victim represents to the killer. 3 weeks later, Finchley struck again. The victim was a 26-year-old university student, another woman on his delivery route. The MO was identical: a blitz attack at the doorway, followed by an act of savage, overkill violence. Panic began to spread. The media called the killer the Crimson Courier, a grim nod to the only potential link between the crimes, the possibility they had recently ordered food. Investigators were inundated with data from dozens of food delivery apps. They had to cross-reference thousands of deliveries with the victims' locations and timelines. It was a logistical nightmare, complicated by the fact that drivers like Finchley often worked from multiple services simultaneously. Finchley, meanwhile, was documenting his crimes in the private forums that had nurtured his hatred. He wrote about his attacks in veiled, coded language, boasting of his victories to his online peers. He didn't use his name, but he provided just enough detail for his fellow radicals to understand. For them, he was a hero, a man who had finally taken action. It was this digital arrogance that would be his undoing. A small, dedicated team of digital forensic analysts working with international law enforcement had been monitoring these extremist forums for years. They were experts at reading between the lines, at spotting the signals in the noise. An analyst flagged a series of posts from a user named St. Arthur 89. The posts, which began shortly after the first murder, spoke of ascending and delivering justice. The timeline was a perfect match. The geographic clues in his writing, though subtle, pointed towards the north of England. The digital side of this was key. We were fighting a war on 2 fronts. On the streets, trying to find a physical suspect, and online, trying to find a digital ghost. The St. Arthur 89 posts were our Rosetta Stone. They gave us a window into his motive, his psychology, his profound sense of grievance. The analysts began a deep dive into the St. Arthur 89 account. They traced its origins, its login patterns, and its digital footprint. Like Kalen Vance, Finchley was careful, using VPNs and public Wi-Fi. But he wasn't perfect. He had used his home network once to access a less secure adjacent forum, leaving a digital breadcrumb that led directly to his small flat. When the tactical unit stormed Arthur Finchley's apartment, they found a man completely engrossed in his computer, typing furiously. The room was a shrine to his ideology, the walls covered in printed-out screeds of misogynistic text. On his screen was a map, with a third location circled in red.
Finchley's arrest brought an end to the terror, but it opened up a disturbing window into the radicalizing power of online echo chambers. He wasn't part of a physical organization. He was a lone wolf who had been ideologically cultivated and encouraged by a global, anonymous network of hate.
The Finchley case is a stark example of what we call stochastic terrorism. The leaders of these online movements don't need to give direct orders. They just need to create an environment so toxic, so filled with rage and dehumanization, that it becomes statistically inevitable someone, like Finchley, will eventually snap and commit an act of violence. He becomes the weapon, but the ideology is the hand that wields it.
The stories of Vance and Finchley illustrate two distinct pathologies of the modern age: the cold, detached predator who uses our openness against us, and the rage-filled isolate who finds validation for his hatred online. But our next case takes us to a place where technology itself becomes the murder weapon, in a crime of almost unimaginable psychological cruelty. We travel now to the hyper-modern cityscape of Tokyo, Japan, and the case of the Silent Room.
In 2025, Japan was a world leader in home automation. Smart homes, controlled by integrated AI systems, were becoming increasingly common in affluent urban areas. These homes promised convenience, security, and a seamless living experience. But for one brilliant sociopathic architect, they offered the opportunity to create the perfect prison.
His name was Ryoichi Tanaka, a visionary in his field, known for designing minimalist, technologically advanced living spaces. His creations were celebrated in architectural magazines as homes of the future. No one knew that Tanaka was using his own projects as a laboratory for a horrifying experiment in control and despair. Tanaka was a malignant narcissist of the highest order. He saw other people not as human beings, but as objects to be manipulated for his own amusement. His fascination was not with the act of killing itself, but with the process of breaking a person's will, of observing their descent from hope to utter hopelessness. The genesis of his plan was a custom-built AI system he developed, which he called the Warden. This system was designed to control every aspect of a home: locks, lights, temperature, water, communications, and even the opacity of the windows. He integrated it secretly into several of the high-end homes he designed, with hidden backdoors that gave him absolute control. His first victim was a young couple, the Watanabes, who had commissioned him to design their dream home in a quiet Tokyo suburb. They were thrilled with the result, a sleek, modern house that seemed to anticipate their every need. They had no idea they were living inside a cage, and that its architect was watching their every move through hidden microcameras. For months, Tanaka did nothing but observe, learning their routines, their fears, and their dependencies. He was like a scientist studying specimens before an experiment. He chose them because they were, in his eyes, perfect, happy, successful, and full of life. They were everything he disdained and secretly envied. Then, on a Friday evening, he activated the Warden. The house sealed itself. The steel shutters, disguised as design elements, slid into place over the bulletproof glass windows. All internet and phone signals were cut off by an integrated jammer. The front door, secured by a series of electromagnetic locks, became an immovable slab of steel. The Watanabes were trapped. What followed was a campaign of psychological torture. The AI, controlled by Tanaka from his remote location, began to manipulate their environment. The temperature would fluctuate wildly, from freezing cold to suffocating heat.
The lights would flicker in disorienting patterns or plunge them into absolute darkness for days. Water would be dispensed in small, rationed amounts, just enough to keep them alive. Food was the cruelest tool. A small dispenser would occasionally release a foul-tasting nutrient paste, but only after they were forced to complete some humiliating or degrading task, which they would hear described by a synthesized voice. This is a form of torture that goes beyond physical violence. Tanaka was stripping away their agency, their very humanity. By controlling their most basic biological needs, warmth, light, water, food, he was reducing them to a state of complete dependency. The goal was to induce what we call learned helplessness, the point at which the victim's spirit is so thoroughly broken they cease to resist their fate. The Watanabe's disappearance was a mystery. They had simply vanished. Their friends and family assumed they had gone on an unannounced trip. The house, from the outside, looked perfectly normal and quiet. No one could have guessed the nightmare unfolding within its silent walls. Inside, Tanaka escalated his experiment. He used the home's integrated sound system to play recordings of their own voices, twisted and distorted. He would project images onto the walls, sometimes happy memories, sometimes terrifying phantoms. He was systematically dismantling their sanity, piece by piece. This case might never have been solved if not for Tanaka's own arrogance. He was meticulously documenting his experiment in a series of encrypted video logs. He recorded the couple's reactions, their conversations, their descent into despair, adding his own cold, analytical commentary. The breakthrough came from an entirely unexpected direction. A cybersecurity expert working for a rival architectural firm had long been suspicious of Tanaka's proprietary AI system. He believed Tanaka had stolen some of his company's code and, in an act of corporate espionage, attempted to hack into Tanaka's central server. He didn't find evidence of code theft. He found hell. He stumbled upon a live video feed from inside the Watanabe house. Horrified, he immediately contacted the Tokyo Metropolitan Police. The information was so bizarre, so outlandish, that at first they were skeptical. But the address was real, and the people were missing. When a specialized tactical unit arrived at the house, they were faced with a fortress. They couldn't breach the doors or the windows. They had to bring in heavy equipment to cut through a reinforced concrete wall in the back of the house. What they found inside was a scene of profound tragedy. The Watanabes had succumbed not to violence, but to dehydration and despair. The house was a pristine, automated tomb. The evidence of Tanaka's psychological torture was everywhere, in the frantic scratches on the walls and the heartbreaking messages they had scrawled to each other in their final days. Ryoichi Tanaka was arrested at his office, calmly reviewing the blueprints for his next project. He showed no remorse, only annoyance that his experiment had been interrupted. His video logs provided an airtight case, a detailed confession of a crime so cold and cruel it defied comprehension. Dr. Finch is a chilling example of a purely sadistic personality. The suffering of others was not a means to an end. It was the end itself. He derived a godlike pleasure from having total control over their existence. In his mind, he wasn't a murderer. He was a researcher, and his victims were merely lab rats. It's a level of dehumanization that is rare, even among the most violent of offenders. The case of the silent room revealed a terrifying vulnerability in our increasingly automated world. The very technology designed to make us safe and comfortable could, in the wrong hands, be turned into an instrument of unimaginable torment. It raised new questions about security, privacy, and the potential for technological abuse. From the high-tech horror of Tokyo, our investigation now shifts to a world away, to the murky, clandestine corners of the internet, where life is cheap and murder is a commodity. We delve into the dark web, a realm of anonymity where criminals trade in drugs, weapons, and even human lives. This is the story of a new kind of contract killer, one who was caught through the very technology he used to hide, the digital Judas. For years, law enforcement agencies around the world were aware of a dark web marketplace that offered wet work, a euphemism for contract killings. The site was called Tartarus, named after the abyss of torment in Greek mythology. It was slick, professional, and operated with a terrifying degree of security. Clients could post a contract providing details of the target. Killers, vetted by the site's anonymous administrators, could then bid on the job. Payment was made in untraceable cryptocurrencies like Monero, held in escrow by the site until the job was confirmed complete, often with photographic proof. One killer, known only by the handle Kane6, was Tartarus's most prolific and reliable asset. He had a 100% success rate and glowing reviews from his anonymous clients. He was believed to be responsible for at least a dozen assassinations across Europe, targeting business rivals, political dissidents, and inconvenient spouses. Kane was a ghost. He never communicated directly with clients, only through the site's encrypted messaging system. He was a master of his craft, able to travel across borders, execute his target, and disappear without a trace. The victims appeared to be casualties of robberies gone wrong or unfortunate accidents. The link between them was invisible. An international task force, including agents from Europol and the FBI, was assembled to dismantle Tartarus and identify Kane6. It was a daunting task. The website was hosted on the Tor network, its physical servers hidden behind layers of encryption and proxies, likely scattered across multiple non-extradition countries. Leading Kontingent der Taskforce war ein brillant, but obsessiver Cyberdetective namens Klaus Richter. Richter beliebte, das No-System war perfekt anonym. Er war convinced, dass alle, eben ein Masterkriminell wie Kane6, würde irgendwann einen Fehler machen. His Strategie war nicht zu attackieren den Tartarus-Site direkt, sondern zu Fokus auf sein Lifeblut, den Flow von Kryptowährung. Attacking the server is like trying to punch smoke. It moves, it disappears. But the money has to go somewhere. Even the most anonymous crypto has to be converted to real-world cash at some point. That is the weak link, the bridge between the digital world and the physical world. That bridge is where we decided to lay our trap. For 2 years, Richter and his team painstakingly traced thousands of transactions associated with the Tartarus site. It was a new frontier of financial forensics. They used advanced blockchain analysis software to follow the faint digital trails of the Monero payments. They noticed a pattern. The payments to Kane6 would be tumbled and mixed through dozens of different wallets, a sophisticated laundering process. But eventually, a portion of these funds would be converted into a more common cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, and then moved to a small, obscure online exchange based in Eastern Europe. This exchange had lax security and know-your-customer protocols, making it a favorite for criminals. The task force couldn't shut it down, but they could watch it. They managed to covertly insert monitoring software into the exchange's servers, allowing them to see transactions in real time. They were waiting for Kane6 to cash out. The break came in late 2024, after the assassination of a French journalist in Brussels. A payment of approximately €150,000 in Monero was sent to Kane6's account on Tartarus. Days later, Richter's team watched as a similar amount, converted to Bitcoin, landed in a wallet on the monitored exchange. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The user of that wallet immediately began to liquidate the Bitcoin, selling it for euros. The funds were then wired to a traditional bank account. For the first time, Kane 6 had a real name attached to his money: Lucas Becker, a 42-year-old freelance logistics consultant living in Hamburg, Germany. The profile was a perfect cover. Becker traveled frequently for his work, giving him a legitimate reason to be in different European cities. He was quiet, single, and kept to himself. He had no criminal record. On the surface, he was utterly unremarkable. It was a shock. You expect a monster, a cinematic hitman, but he was just a gray man, a nobody. It shows you that the most dangerous people are the ones who have mastered the art of being invisible, of blending into the background of modern life. Undercover surveillance on Lucas Becker began immediately. They tracked his movements, monitored his communications. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when they observed him retrieving a package from a dead drop location in a Hamburg park. Inside was a disassembled sniper rifle. Becker was arrested as he was preparing for his next trip. In his apartment, they found a treasure trove of evidence: multiple passports with different identities, a sophisticated computer setup for accessing the dark web, and a collection of untraceable ghost guns assembled from parts ordered online. The interrogation was a battle of wits. Becker was intelligent, arrogant, and believed he was untouchable. He denied everything. But when Richter's team presented him with the blockchain analysis, the step-by-step digital trail of his blood money, his composure finally cracked. Becker is a classic example of a psychopathic personality, but with a modern twist. His psychopathy manifests not in explosive rage, but in a complete lack of empathy and a purely transactional view of human life. People were simply obstacles or targets, defined by a price. The anonymity of the dark web allowed him to fully indulge this worldview without the messy complications of human interaction. The capture of the digital Judas was a landmark victory in the fight against cybercrime. It proved that even in the deepest, darkest corners of the internet, there is no such thing as perfect anonymity. The case of Lucas Becker demonstrated that the digital breadcrumbs, however faint, always lead somewhere. Our journey into the minds of modern killers has so far explored the digital stalker, the radicalized loner, the technological sadist, and the dark web assassin. Each represents a unique pathology, twisted and amplified by the tools of our age. Now, we travel to the vast, open spaces of the North American prairies, a landscape whose emptiness can hide the darkest of secrets. Here, we encounter a predator who used the lifeblood of the modern economy, long-haul trucking, as his personal hunting ground, the prairie predator. For years, a series of disappearances and unsolved murders of young women had haunted the remote highways of Western Canada and the northern United States. The victims were often from transient populations: hitchhikers, runaways, sex workers, people whose absence might not be immediately noticed. The vast distances and multiple jurisdictions made connecting the cases nearly impossible. The killer was a phantom who moved along the arteries of the continent, the interstate and trans-Canada highways. The crimes were opportunistic, brutal, and left little evidence. The victims were often found months or even years later in remote, desolate locations, their bodies ravaged by the elements, leaving police with almost nothing to go on. This was the hunting ground of Thomas McCall, a 51-year-old long-haul trucker. For over 2 decades, McCall had lived a life on the road, a ghost in a 10-ton machine. His job gave him the perfect cover: constant mobility, a plausible reason to be anywhere, and a workspace, the cab of his truck, that was a private, movable kingdom where he was king. McCall was not a sophisticated planner like Kalen Vance or a tech-savvy operator like Lucas Becker. He was a creature of impulse and brutal simplicity. He preyed on the vulnerable, those he could easily overpower and control. His truck was his lair, a soundproofed, mobile prison from which there was no escape. The long-haul trucker lifestyle can create a profound sense of disassociation and anonymity,
For a personality with pre-existing paraphilias and aggressive tendencies, like Mikhail, this environment is a perfect storm. He is detached from community, from accountability. The road becomes a fantasy world where social rules don't apply, and his violent impulses can be enacted without immediate consequence. The challenge for law enforcement was immense. They were dealing with a ghost train of potential suspects, tens of thousands of trucks moving across the continent every day. The victims were found in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, and North Dakota. 4 different police agencies, 4 different sets of files, and no clear connection. The breakthrough began with the tireless work of one RCMP corporal in rural Saskatchewan named Isabelle Dubois. Dubois was convinced the seemingly unrelated cases were the work of a single offender. She spent her own time building a master database, mapping the locations where victims were last seen and where their remains were found. She noticed a pattern. The locations were all within a few miles of major truck stops or remote highway pull-offs. The timeline of the disappearances, when laid out over a decade, suggested a killer who was constantly on the move, but who returned to the same hunting grounds periodically. Corporal Dubois' theory was met with skepticism at first. The idea of a cross-border serial killer was a logistical nightmare that no single agency wanted to own. But she persisted, championing the use of new forensic technologies to find a link between the cold cases. The key was familial DNA. In one of the cases, from Montana, investigators had recovered a tiny, degraded sample of the killer's DNA from under the victim's fingernails. It wasn't enough for a direct match in any criminal database, but forensic science had evolved. Using the latest techniques, a lab was able to generate a partial genetic profile. They uploaded this profile to public genealogy websites, the kind people use to trace their ancestry. They weren't looking for the killer, they were looking for his relatives. They were building a family tree and then hunting for a branch that led to a monster. After months of painstaking work, they got a hit. A second cousin of the unknown suspect living in Oregon. Working with genealogists, investigators began to build out the family tree. They traced it forward, identifying hundreds of relatives. Then they began the process of elimination. They cross-referenced the names with trucking company databases and border crossing records. They were looking for a male relative who had been a long-haul trucker during the time of the murders and whose routes corresponded with the locations of the crimes. The list narrowed until only one name remained: Thomas McCall. It was a moment of absolute clarity. Seeing his name, his photograph, his trucking logs, it all just clicked into place. The dates, the locations, it was a perfect match. We had found our ghost. He wasn't a supernatural force. He was just a man in a truck, hiding in plain sight. McCall was located at a truck stop in Alberta. The arrest was quiet and anticlimactic. He was in the middle of a meal, looking like any other road-weary driver. But when his truck was searched, the full horror of his decades-long reign of terror was revealed. The cab of his truck had been modified. A hidden compartment, soundproofed and reinforced, was built into the sleeper area. Inside, they found trophies from his victims, jewelry, driver's licenses, scraps of clothing. It was a mobile tomb, a museum of his brutality. Forensic analysis of the truck's cab uncovered DNA evidence from at least 8 different missing women, finally linking him concretely to the string of unsolved murders. McCall, confronted with the irrefutable genetic evidence, began to talk. He confessed to more than 15 murders, his memory of the events chillingly casual and detached. McCall is a more traditional, though no less barbaric, type of serial predator. He's a sexual sadist who derives pleasure from the complete domination and terror of his victims. Unlike the more modern killers we've examined, his motives are primal. The truck and the highway system are simply the modern tools that enabled his ancient pathology to flourish on an unprecedented scale.
The case of the prairie predator was a triumph for forensic genealogy, a powerful new tool that is helping to solve cold cases around the world. It demonstrated that even when a killer leaves no digital footprint, their own genetic code can become the trail that leads investigators to their door. It proved that in the fight against evil, the secrets of the past can be unlocked by the science of the future. From the lonely highways of North America, our investigation takes us to the sun-drenched suburbs of Sydney, Australia. Here, we confront a type of killer who is perhaps the most bewildering and tragic of all, the family annihilator. But this case has a terrifyingly modern twist involving social media, financial desperation, and the curated lie of a perfect life. This is the story of the Sydney Smile. To the outside world, the Marshall family was the picture of success. David Marshall was a charismatic financial advisor. His wife, Chloe, a part-time yoga instructor. Their two children, 8-year-old Lily and 10-year-old Oscar, were bright and popular. Their social media profiles, particularly Chloe's popular Instagram account, painted a portrait of domestic bliss. Sun-kissed beach holidays, happy family dinners, and smiling school photos. This carefully constructed image, however, was a complete fabrication. Behind the digital facade, David Marshall's life was unraveling. A series of disastrous investments and a burgeoning gambling addiction had plunged him into catastrophic debt. He was facing financial ruin, professional disgrace, and the collapse of the perfect world he had built. For a man with a deeply narcissistic personality, this was a fate worse than death. The exposure of his failure was an intolerable threat to his ego. He couldn't bear the thought of his friends, his community, and his online followers seeing him as anything less than the successful, happy family man he pretended to be. Dr. Finch, for the family annihilator, particularly the narcissistic type like David Marshall, the family is not seen as a group of individuals with their own lives. They are seen as extensions of himself, props in the play he is staging. When he decides to end his own life, he believes he has the right to take them with him, to prevent them from witnessing his failure or living a life independent of his control. It is the ultimate act of selfish control, masquerading as a twisted form of protection. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy in early 2023, David's behavior became increasingly erratic, but he hid it well. He began meticulously planning the end. He took out new life insurance policies. He wrote a long, rambling manifesto on his computer, a document filled with self-pity, blame, and justifications for the horror he was about to unleash. His planning also had a chillingly modern component. He scheduled a series of social media posts to go live from his wife's account in the days after the event. They were cheerful, mundane posts, a picture of the kids at the park, a photo of a meal, designed to create a digital alibi, to give the impression that the family was still alive and well, delaying the discovery of his crime. On a quiet Tuesday night, after the children were asleep, David Marshall put his plan into action. He sedated his wife and children before killing them in their sleep. It was a cold, methodical act, a brutal tidying up of his life's loose ends. Afterward, he went to his study and took his own life. The next morning, a scheduled post appeared on Chloe's Instagram. It was a sunny photo of the family on their last holiday with the caption, "Take me back to the sunshine. #family first, #blessed." Friends liked the post. Some left cheerful comments, completely unaware that the people in the photograph were all gone. For 3 days, the automated posts continued, creating a grotesque, ghostly presence online. A picture of a cake Chloe had supposedly baked. A shot of the family dog in the garden. Each post pushed the discovery of the crime further away, just as David had intended. It was a final, desperate act of image management from beyond the grave. The alarm was finally raised by Chloe's sister, who became concerned when she couldn't reach her by phone. The cheerful but impersonal nature of the social media posts felt strange, out of character. She called the police and asked them to perform a wellness check. When officers forced entry into the pristine suburban home, they were met with a scene of utter devastation. The house was quiet, orderly, a silent monument to a life that had been a lie. The discovery of David's manifesto on his laptop laid bare the shocking motive, a man who would rather murder his entire family than face the shame of his own failure. In my 20 years on the force, it's the quietest, most disturbing scene I've ever attended. The whole house was perfect, like a showroom. And then you walked into the bedrooms. The contrast between the image they presented to the world and the reality of what happened in that house, it will haunt me forever. The case of the Sydney Smile was a tragic commentary on the pressures of modern life and the curated reality of social media. It revealed how the gap between our public personas and our private struggles can become a breeding ground for desperation and, in rare, extreme cases, for unimaginable violence. The Marshall case is a cautionary tale. It highlights the danger of what we call facade management. Social media encourages us to present an idealized version of our lives. For a fragile, narcissistic personality, this facade can become more important than reality itself. When the facade is threatened, they can be driven to extreme, violent measures to protect it, even if it means destroying the very people they claim to love. The horror in Sydney was a crime of intimacy, of a darkness that grew within the four walls of a home. But our next and final case study takes us to a place where the lines between crime, politics, and environmental conflict are blurred. We journey deep into the Amazon rainforest in Brazil to a story of a killer who was not just a murderer, but a symbol of a brutal war over the planet's future, the Amazonian Shadow. In the remote state of Pará, a violent conflict has been raging for years, largely unseen by the outside world. It's a war between illegal loggers, miners, and land grabbers on one side, and indigenous communities and environmental activists on the other. The prize is the Amazon itself, one of the world's most vital natural resources. In this lawless frontier, violence is common, but a new level of brutality emerged in the early 2020s. Activists and indigenous leaders began to be hunted and killed with military precision. The killer was methodical, elusive, and incredibly savage, earning him the name Sombra, or the Shadow, from the terrified local communities. Sombra was not a typical serial killer driven by internal psychological demons. He was a pistolero, a hired gun, but one of a new, more sophisticated breed. His real name was Marco Rocha, a former Special Forces soldier from the Brazilian army, dishonorably discharged for extreme violence. He was now a mercenary, selling his elite skills to wealthy landowners and illegal mining operations who wanted to clear the forest of obstacles. Rocha was a master of jungle warfare. He could move through the dense, unforgiving rainforest like a phantom, tracking his targets for days or weeks. But he combined these traditional skills with modern technology. He used satellite phones for encrypted communication with his employers, thermal imaging drones to locate his targets' camps at night, and high-powered, silent sniper rifles to execute them from a distance. His victims were not just killed, they were made examples of. The violence was often ritualistic and symbolic, designed to terrorize the community into silence. He would target charismatic leaders, people who were rallying their communities to resist the destruction of their land. The message was clear: resistance is futile. One of his victims was a renowned environmental activist named Elena Alves. She had been instrumental in exposing a massive illegal logging operation. Rocha stalked her for a week, learning her movements. He didn't just kill her, he ambushed her and her team, executing them with cold precision and leaving their bodies in a way that would sow maximum fear. Investigating these crimes was incredibly difficult. The sheer vastness of the Amazon, the lack of infrastructure, and the pervasive corruption made traditional police work almost impossible. Witnesses were too terrified to speak. Evidence was quickly reclaimed by the jungle. The fight against Sombra was taken up by a small, underfunded team of federal police agents and environmental investigators. They knew they couldn't beat him in the jungle. They had to find him in the digital world. They began by focusing on his employers. They conducted a deep financial investigation into the landowners and mining companies suspected of using his services. They were looking for the money trail, the payments for his bloody work. They also deployed their own technology. They used sophisticated satellite imagery analysis to track deforestation patterns, which helped them predict where conflicts and Sombra were likely to erupt next. They also managed to place a covert GPS tracker on a fuel truck that supplied one of the illegal mines deep in the jungle. This tracker was their key. They noticed the truck making unusual, unscheduled stops in remote areas. Cross-referencing these locations with the timing of recent attacks, they realized this was how Sombra was being resupplied. He wasn't living off the land entirely. He was being supported by a modern logistics chain. They planned a trap. Working with a trusted informant, they leaked false information about a secret meeting of indigenous leaders at a specific, remote location. They knew Roach's employers would pass this information to him, drawing him out. An elite team of police commandos was deployed, setting up a perimeter around the fake meeting location. They used their own thermal drones to watch the jungle. For 2 days, they waited in the suffocating heat. Then, on the third night, they saw him. A single heat signature, moving with unnatural speed and silence through the dense undergrowth. When they finally cornered Marco Rocha, he fought with the ferocity of a caged animal. But he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. His capture was a major blow to the illegal operations in the region. His encrypted satellite phone contained a ledger of his crimes, implicating some of the most powerful men in the state. Dr. Finch, voiceover. Rocha is a different category of killer. He is what we might call an instrumental psychopath. The violence is not an end in itself. It is a tool to achieve a goal. In this case, money and the thrill of the hunt. He has the psychological makeup of a serial killer, the lack of empathy, the predatory instinct, but it has been channeled and professionalized. He's a monster, but one who is a symptom of a much larger systemic disease of greed and violence. The story of the Amazonian shadow shows how the most ancient of conflicts, the battle over land and resources, is now being fought with the tools of modern warfare and technology. It highlights a brutal intersection of crime, capitalism, and environmental destruction, creating a new type of predator who is as much a soldier as he is a serial killer. Across all these cases, from the suburbs of Dallas to the depths of the Amazon, we see a common thread: the evolution of both the criminal and the investigator. The same technological forces that have empowered these new breeds of killers have also armed law enforcement with revolutionary tools to fight back. This is the story of the forensic revolution. In the 20th century, the gold standard of forensic evidence was the fingerprint. But today, investigators have an arsenal of techniques that were once the stuff of science fiction. The most powerful of these is DNA. A single skin cell, a drop of saliva, a stray hair, all can contain the unique genetic blueprint of an offender. We saw its power in the case of the prairie predator, where familial DNA was used to reach back through generations and identify a killer who had evaded capture for decades. This technique, once controversial, is now responsible for solving hundreds of cold cases, bringing long-delayed justice to victims and their families. But the science is moving even further. DNA phenotyping allows scientists to predict a suspect's physical appearance, their eye color, hair color, skin tone, and ancestry, all from a DNA sample left at a crime scene. This doesn't give you a name, but it can create a genetic mugshot, dramatically narrowing the pool of suspects and giving police a face to look for. Then there is the digital world. As we saw with the Ghost of the Grid and the Crimson Courier, killers who live and operate online inevitably leave a footprint. Every click, every search, every login creates a data point. For cyber detectives, the challenge is to find that one critical data point in a universe of digital noise. It's a cat-and-mouse game. They use VPNs. We learn to trace VPNs. They use encryption. We work on breaking encryption. They use cryptocurrency. We learn to follow the blockchain. Every time they build a wall, we start looking for a crack. The internet is not as anonymous as they think. There are always echoes, always shadows they leave behind. Geolocation data from smartphones has become another crucial tool. It can place a suspect at the scene of a crime with incredible precision. It can track their movements before and after an offense, revealing patterns and destroying alibis. This constant tracking, a privacy concern for many, has become an invaluable asset for law enforcement. Even the vehicles we drive are now sources of evidence. The GPS and infotainment systems in modern cars record a wealth of data. Routes taken, speeds, even when doors were opened and closed. In multiple cases, this data has been used to confirm or dismantle a suspect's story, providing a silent digital witness to their actions. And on the streets, the proliferation of CCTV and doorbell cameras has created a vast, interconnected web of surveillance. An investigation no longer just involves canvassing a single street. It involves collecting and analyzing footage from dozens, sometimes hundreds of cameras, piecing together a suspect's movements frame by frame, like a giant digital jigsaw puzzle. This technological arms race has a profound psychological effect. For the modern investigator, it provides hope and powerful tools. But for the modern criminal, it creates a new kind of paranoia. They have to achieve a level of operational security, both physical and digital, that is almost perfect. The slightest mistake, a single moment of carelessness, can be the thread that unravels their entire enterprise. This pressure can force them into making more mistakes. But technology is a double-edged sword. While it helps catch killers, it also presents new challenges. The sheer volume of data, terabytes of video footage, millions of online profiles, endless financial transactions can be overwhelming. The future of investigation lies in AI and machine learning, developing algorithms that can sift through this data, identify patterns, and point detectives in the right direction. The forensic revolution is a constant, dynamic process. For every new lock, a new key is forged. For every new shadow, a new light is invented to pierce the darkness. It is the modern-day expression of an age-old struggle, the battle between order and chaos, between the forces of justice and the enduring presence of evil. We have journeyed into the heart of modern darkness. We have unmasked the predators who walk among us, who use our own tools, our own communities, our own digital lives as their hunting grounds. What have we learned, and what does the future hold? The cases we've examined are not just isolated horror stories. They are reflections of our time, symptoms of the pressures, paradoxes, and pathologies of the 21st century. The profound isolation of Arthur Finchley, the narcissistic facade of David Marshall, the digital omniscience sought by Kalen Vance. These are dark mirrors of the anxieties that run beneath the surface of our connected world. One of the most significant changes is the performance aspect of modern crime. With social media, some killers are not just committing a crime, they are creating content. They are seeking an audience, validation, infamy. This blurs the line between a private pathology and a public spectacle, and it's a very dangerous development. It can inspire copycats and create a culture of violence as a form of celebrity. The nature of evil itself may not have changed.
The dark impulses of sadism, control, and rage are as old as humanity, but the expression of that evil has been transformed. The modern world has provided new weapons, new methods, and new ideologies that can channel these impulses into acts of unprecedented barbarity. The anonymity of the internet allows hatred to fester and grow without social consequence. The gig economy can create a class of detached, invisible workers, hiding predators in plain sight. Our own willingness to share every detail of our lives online can provide a blueprint for those who wish to do us harm. But our journey has also revealed a powerful counter-narrative, one of resilience, ingenuity, and an unyielding pursuit of justice. We have seen detectives who can follow a killer's trail through the digital ether, scientists who can rebuild a face from a single cell, and communities that refuse to be defined by the tragedies inflicted upon them. The scars left by these killers run deep. They are not just felt by the families of the victims, but by entire communities. They erode our sense of trust, our feeling of safety. They force us to look at our neighbors, our colleagues, and the anonymous figures on our streets with a flicker of suspicion. To live in the modern world is to accept certain risks, to navigate a landscape where the physical and digital realms are inextricably linked. The challenge is to embrace the connections and conveniences of our age without becoming vulnerable to the predators who exploit them. It requires a new kind of awareness, a digital literacy that goes beyond knowing how to post a photo and extends to understanding who might be watching. The fight against the monsters of our time is not just a job for the police, it is a shared responsibility. It lies in fostering real-world communities to combat the isolation that breeds extremism. It lies in teaching our children to navigate the online world with caution and wisdom. And it lies in refusing to let fear dictate how we live our lives. For every act of barbarism, there are 1,000 acts of kindness. For every killer who seeks to tear the fabric of society, there are millions of people working to mend it. The echoes of evil are loud, but the chorus of our shared humanity, of our collective desire for peace and justice, must always be louder. What creates a monster? The question remains, perhaps forever, unanswerable. But by unmasking the ones who walk among us today, by studying their methods and their minds, we arm ourselves with knowledge. And in the unending darkness, knowledge is a powerful light.